Hello, everyone. I am Dino Scaros, and we are SOPHIA, the Society of Presidential Historians in Academia. I'm here today with Feather Schwartz Foster. It's January 9th, 2026. This is our first interview of 2026. Uh, our website is sophiascholars.com, and you can scan the QR code on the screen and take a look at our page. If you like what you see, we would love to have you join us. It's open to anyone who is interested in joining. We're very happy to have Feather here today. She is a Sophia member. She is a presidential historian. You don't have to know as much as Feather. Not many people do about the presidents. It's just about those who are really interested. Feather has written many books. She'll tell you about that. She'll tell you about her new book, and we're going to get into some fun stuff about the first ladies of the United States, some of them anyway, because Sophia is all about anything that has to do with presidents and their presidencies, and certainly the wives of the presidents are pertain to the presidents because they're married and quite often they may play an important role in the presidency. So, with that in mind, I'd like to welcome you, Feather, to our podcast, and please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm delighted to be on your podcast, and I'm delighted to be chatting with you again, Dina. We've had a few conversations before, and they were always delicious. Anyway, I am a presidential-ish, mostly first ladies historian by avocation. I know you say you're historians in academia. I am not a professor. Never have been, never been a teacher of any kind. I was in the business world, but when I retired, I decided to turn a hobby or an interest into my retirement career, and I am having a blast. I just love it. One of my happiest things that I do, other than writing about the first ladies, is I do teach some courses at Osher Institute at the College of William and Mary. I've been doing that since 2010, and it is the joy of my retirement. Really great.
That's wonderful, and I can't wait to get started today. So, when you think of first ladies who've had an impact on their husbands' presidencies, who comes to mind?
Well, most people go directly to Abigail Adams. She was a really brainy lady. She was a smart lady. But in my own humble opinion, and I imagine there are lots of scholars out there who would nod in agreement, her biggest contribution was as John's wife. She was not a political powerhouse per se, and especially when John was president. When he became president, they were living in Philadelphia. He had been vice president for 8 years, and Abigail's health was not good at all. It's hard to figure out exactly what was the matter with her because that was what, 250 years ago, and people didn't really know, except that she just wasn't well and went back to Massachusetts whenever she could. But her impact on the presidency of John Adams was enormous because she had the impact and she had the influence with John as a person. And they had been married for what, 35 years by that time. And he appreciated her um, possibly more than any other president appreciated his wife. And that was from the beginning. He
That's
saw her influence, he saw her opinions. Yes.
that's great. That's great. Keep going. I'm sorry.
Um, her actual she didn't always agree with John. I like to always bring that out because, especially by the time he became president, there. viewpoints, their experiences, some jointly, some individually. They had changed a little bit. She was not an echo. And I think because she was not an echo, he appreciated her even more because she brought other things to the table that way. She brought a different perspective, a different viewpoint. And whatever her viewpoint was, it was always well founded. I mean, she wasn't a flibbertigibbet, she wasn't flighty or anything else. If she had something to say, it was usually worth hearing. And when she did, get political or express her opinion, they were to John. She did not write letters to the editor of different newspapers. However, she wrote a lot of letters to family members and friends, knowing that those letters might find, or pieces of them might find their way into the newspapers or the different gazettes throughout the country.
That is very, very interesting. I do have a follow-up. Is there anything of particular note that you think John Adams may have changed his mind about that affected policy?
John Adams, neither Adams, to tell you the truth, come to mind if you say the most open-minded and willing to change their mind presidents. They were not high on that list. They took a while to develop their viewpoints, and once gained, they pretty much stayed. However, Abigail did change quite a bit during her years in Europe. She broadened. She had never been outside of Massachusetts before she went to Europe. She was 40 years old, and everything was new to her, and she was willing to be open, grudgingly. I mean, she didn't leap into it wholeheartedly at first. It was a little bit of a tiptoe, but she did broaden and she did change. John Adams always was a is a well-balanced man. He thought so much for the good of the country as a whole rather than a political party. He was not a party guy. When I say that, I mean a political party type of a
Right.
person. He was not like that. He was very much what is good for the country. And there was an awful lot going on during his presidency with France and England at war with each other, sniping at us any way they could to try to keep us from dealing with the other warring party. And John was in a big quandary over that because he did not want to go to war with anybody. And he did stand his ground.
That is great insight, and we're going to talk about your book or your books in a little bit. But this is a great teaser because for those of you listening, Feather talks a great deal about the first ladies and focuses on the early first ladies. So, is there another first lady of that era of the founding generation that comes to mind as having been impactful on her husband's presidency?
Well, of course, there is Dolly. Dolly Madison was kind of an unlikely first lady. She was 17 years younger than James Madison and maybe a half a head taller. She's bigger than he was. And he was her second husband. She had been married earlier, and her first husband died, leaving her with a little baby, a little 2-year old. And when she married Madison, she grew to love him dearly. He was always mad about her. He just absolutely loved her wildly, and she grew to love him dearly. She also learned a lot from Madison. Dolly was a Quaker in her upbringing, and her education was okay. You know, it wasn't phenomenal. She was born in the late 1760s, so you can figure that out. And other than domestically inclined, she was not an intellect. He was. And he had gone to the College of New Jersey, which is now Princeton, and they never did take dummies. And he was one of their stellar students, and he taught her a great deal. And she listened, and she asked questions, and so she grew in that regard. She spent about 16 years as a either first lady or quasi de facto first lady in Jefferson's administration because he was a widower. Madison was his Secretary of State, and Dolly by that time had been married to Madison for a half dozen years or so, somewhere in that area. She was in her early to mid 30s, and she was pretty. She was stylish. She had a very outgoing personality, and it was honest. She wasn't putting on airs. She wasn't trying to make people like. She didn't have to try to make you like her. She just had that way about you. Everybody liked her. Everybody liked her a lot. And when she became First Lady, she opened the White House to all sorts of entertainment, to all sorts of soirees, because Washington was still a little village, and this gave the politicians and other people involved in politics, in government, an opportunity to meet each other informally rather than in their office with people taking notes and everything. She just opened it up, and she warmed her husband. She made him, he was a shy fellow. He was a quiet fellow. She just brought him the best of him out. And she was one of those first ladies who, quote, she never missed a beat and she never really made any mistakes.
That is another great example. Thank you. One of the things we do here at Sophia, as you know, is we try to focus on what I call the forgotten presidents, because many people who only have a casual acquaintance with the presidents, they can name the founding presidents, they can probably name most of the presidents since World War II. But then there's that group in the middle, except for, let's say, Abraham Lincoln. There's that group in the middle that often get forgotten. Are there any first ladies uh, who come to mind from presidents that, let's say, for lack of a better word, the average person wouldn't recall when asked to name the presidents?
Well, the one that really comes to mind that should be better known, is particularly his wife, of course, because that's what we're talking about here, is Taft and his wife, Nellie. Helen Herron Taft, everybody called her Nellie from birth. She was born about the same time that the Civil War started. I think she was born in 1861. And she lived to be 83 years old. And she married Taft. He was a big fella, but Nellie wanted to be First Lady. Everybody is going to tell you that who knows anything about First Ladies and history of that type. Nellie wanted to be First Lady since she was maybe 15, 16 years old.
Hmm.
She was an Ohioan, and her dad was an attorney, not anything special, but I mean, he was a fair to middling attorney, but he was good friends with Rutherford B. Hayes, even from before Hayes became president, or governor even, and Mrs. Herron, Nellie's mom, had become very, very good friends with Lucy Hayes. So when the Hayeses became president and first lady, they eventually invited their good friends, the Herons, to come visit at the White House. Nellie went with them, and it was an eye opener for her because she was smart as a whip, and it didn't take her long to realize that the White House was the center of power. And she liked that. And she sniffed that part out. And it wasn't just because you wore pretty clothes or you had nice food on the table or you entertained interesting people. She knew this is where it's happening. And she wanted to be there, and she spent her entire life trying to get there. And when she married Taft, she believed that he was a good vehicle to get there. He was a few years older than she was, not that much, maybe five. And he went to Yale. He became an attorney. And very early on in their marriage, after he didn't practice law that long because he got an opportunity to become a judge. And he loved the judiciary. That was absolutely, he was in heaven in the judiciary. And I always thought, Taft was a big guy. He was our heaviest president. He was about 6'1" or so, but he was also a guy who, in his slimmest days, weighed at least 250 pounds, and that was when he was being svelte.
Mhm.
His weight ballooned up and down, 50, 75 pounds at a clip. And maybe the judge's robes covered a great deal of territory. We didn't have to buy them that often. They just fit over everything. Anyway, Nellie guided his political career. They both came from large families, and Taft was very, very close with his parents. His father had been a cabinet member under Grant. He was also a diplomat overseas, and his brothers were also very, very influential. The Taft family is extremely close, and Nellie had a seat at their table, and I mean the council table. And Nellie was another one that if she had something to say, was usually worth saying. The unfortunate part is that by the time she became First Lady, um, she very early on. The inauguration was in early March. By the middle to the end of May, she had had a stroke, and it was a serious stroke. And while it didn't cripple her, she developed aphasia, which meant that her words were garbled. She couldn't communicate. Her mouth drooped. This is something that is it's a sad because the receptor part of your brain is fine. You understand everything that's going on. And she did not lose her memory or anything else, or if she did, it came back very quickly. She could remember everything. She knew exactly what was going on, but she couldn't communicate it, nor could she appear in public for quite a long time. And it was really sad, and it was sad for Taft because he lost his one of his best counselors. He lost the one that he could sit down and talk to for a while and work out problems. She knew all the players, she knew all the issues. And this is something that, if you ever do invite me to come back again, Nellie is one of the first ladies I would be really happy to discuss in a little bit more depth because she's worth it.
It goes without saying that we'll definitely have you back, and I'm so glad you brought her up. So, would it be fair to say that since William Howard Taft loved the judiciary so much, and of course returned to it after being president, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, would it be fair to say that had he been married to another woman, he might have just stayed in the judiciary and never considered being president?
That is not um, that is not out of reach. that is not out of reach. Nellie was a dynamo. She was smart, she was active, and she had ambition. Most historians who dwell on Nellie even a little bit, that's one of the words that come to mind with her, that she was the one with ambition. And she had both kinds of ambition. She had two kinds of ambition: the ambition to want something, and the ambition to pursue it and make it happen. That doesn't always happen together. She wanted it.
I'd love to just go through so many first ladies, but I'd like to keep these podcasts between 20 and 30 minutes. So if you can please give us one more, that'd be great.
I'd be glad to. The other one who really ought to be known, and she was a pistol. This one was a pistol, was Florence Harding, Warren Harding's wife. She was also born when the Civil War was starting. I think she was born in 1860. Excuse me.
Mhm.
And she was a tough old broad, is what she was.
Mm,
And she was married before she married Harding. She was a divorcee. She came from a family. Her father was a wealthy man, or he became wealthy. He didn't start out that way, but he became wealthy, and he was a banker, and he was he was a domineering fellow. Uh, some people say tyrannical, and her home life was not the best, and so she had a tendency to be out of the house as much as she could. And she got married after, they say, she found herself a little bit pregnant.
mm,
And uh, and she was about 19 or so at the time, 18, 19. The marriage did not last long. Her first husband, who was about 2 years older than she was, he had two big problems. Number one, he drank, and number two, he didn't work. So
mm,
you put those two things together, you don't have a good marriage here.
mhm,
And anyway, Florence was left with a little baby, and her husband left her. He eventually died a couple of years later, and she started to form a life of her own. And a few years later, she met Warren Harding, who was a very genial, good-looking fellow who was in the newspaper business. He had bought, as a young man, uh, an interest in a local weekly paper or twice a week paper, and he made it work. He built it into something uh, kind of good, like a major daily in Ohio, in Marion, Ohio. It wasn't the biggest town, but it was a nice daily. And when you are good looking, articulate, a newspaper publisher, you get invited to places. You get invited. Would you speak to the Kiwanis? Would you speak to the Rotary Club? Would you speak to the veterans groups or different other organizations, which he was happy to do. He was a good speaker. Well, he was an easy speaker. He liked doing it, and he talked about all the things people wanted to hear. At that time, Theodore Roosevelt was in the White House, and what did they want to hear? Everything is wonderful. We've got Disney World's Main Street, and this is what Marion, Ohio was like at the time. So he was promoting things like, apple pie and Fourth of July and
mhm.
all those kind of feel good issues. And so being a popular speaker leads very quickly into politics. Florence um, liked politics. She liked it a lot. And it was said that she also had a seat at the table. But this was the political table. It wasn't a family table. This was the table with the politicians who used to come to the Harding house to play poker. And Mrs. Harding was there. He had nicknamed her the Duchess. And the politicians grew to not only like her, sort of. She was not the easiest person to like, but they got to like her, but they respected her. And they also knew that if she had something to say, it was worth listening to.
That is another great story, and I have more questions to ask. But right now, Feather, if you could tell us about your upcoming book, what it's called, when it's out, where you can get it.
Well, right now, it is done. I
Mhm.
have signed off on the final everythings, and it is scheduled for sometime in the spring, and it is called the Colonial First Ladies. And it's about Mrs. Washington, Mrs. Adams, and Mrs. Madison. And I like to think that it is an easy read. I don't like to bombard people with academic, um, nitpicking kind of things. I am not a professor, and nobody's going to be graded on it. You don't have to worry about that. You can just enjoy it. And my purpose, well, I was invited to write it, by the way, by an English publishing company. And my main purpose is to focus on what those three ladies expected of themselves in their own time. They didn't, none of them expected that they were going to be first ladies. If you ask them, oh, you're going to be first lady, they're going to say, what's that? Because they had no idea what it was. They just were expected to be good wives and mothers, which they weren't. Um, anyway, the book is supposed to come out in the spring. I am not sure of the exact date. And because it is a British publication, I'm still not quite sure of their um, processes. I know it's supposed to get published and be on the market in the UK before it comes here, but not very long hang up between that time. Hopefully, it will be out in the mid to late spring. You probably be able to get it online everywhere. Hopefully, it will be in the stores, a lot of stores, because the British publisher has an affiliate here in Pennsylvania, which last I heard was still state. And so it will be a little bit easier to communicate with them.
That is great. And for those who don't know, on our website, we have a section called Books by SOPHIA members, and we have some of Feather's books on there already, and we're going to be delighted to add Colonial First Ladies when it's out and available.
Yeah.
So, again, Feather, I want to thank you for this wonderful podcast today. I really, really appreciate it. And for everyone, again, scan the QR code or just type in sophiascholars.com. Please take a look at our website. We have a conference coming up in April. We have a new journal that we're looking for contributors. So join us if you like. Thank you again, and we'll see you for the next podcast.